Okay, and we have some veggies from Brad's garden. It's beautiful. Welcome everyone, 26th of October 2022. Charles Glass here with a small handful of friends, and some in and around the Kernel community and others elsewhere. We pulled in kind of spontaneously in a spirit of readying the soil. And we're also pointing ahead in a week or so. On the 1st of November, there's a community wisdom gardening pattern jam, and we may discover something of what that means or what that looks like from here. And I have one question, and then maybe I'll offer a couple more comments. Kind of my inquiry after reading 95%. I think I didn't literally make it to the end or to the readying piece, but within our big, bold, hairy, audacious collective intentioning and dreaming and aspiring and inspiring and probably perspiring, how can we keep it simple enough and get out of the way or our own ways? And yeah, I think I will briefly turn it over to Andy, sort of on the heels of our Weeching exercise. We're starting a practice of group Weeching inquiry, and we received kind of on behalf of the community this gathering the essence in or to a comfort. That was kind of the sequence, and with a sense of readying and kind of growing this knowledge or awareness. Andy, something further about Kernel and the Kernel Garden, and sort of introducing Kernel to Nora and Tom, and us to them in some ways.
Of course. Thank you, Charles. The prompt for simplicity is a very beautiful one. The word itself means one thread, as opposed to complex, meaning many threads. It comes from weaving. And it's really useful to have that as our starting point, this notion of how to get to one thread, because simple is not easy. The etymology of easy means near. It's something I can grab right around here, whereas simple is one thread. And as it relates to Kernel, the idea here is, what is the one thread of Kernel? Which is very simple. It's we want to learn together. And when I read Nora's piece on readying, I see that change and learn in some contexts mean the same thing, but there is this very particular and deep and rich tapestry of understanding, some submerged, some less so, as it applies to change. But still that one thread. We want to learn. We want to learn together. To learn together is the simple thread of what Kernel is. It somehow relates to change. It somehow relates to readying in very deep ways. And that particular directedness is so interesting, especially as it results in the kind of multiple, unpredictable, nth order blossoming of possibilities and potential that come from like your own singular focus. And that interplay is really interesting for me, because like in order to be simple myself in my own beingness is what enables others to really genuinely be themselves in these multiple, plural, unpredictable manners. And it's that kind of mirroring which has always been at the heart of the real transmission of wisdom. The tradition that I know this in best is Sufism, where it's called silsilas, chains of light, this Arabic word. But it's something that's really fascinating to think about, how this transmission truly happen, not just of what John Favicki would call propositional knowledge, not even really of procedural knowledge, the knowledge of how to use tools, not even perspectival knowledge, the knowledge of how to frame things, ontologies is what we would call it, but something participatory, It's full and embodied and vital and luscious and living and dying and all of these things. So that remains fascinating to me. How can I find the simplicity of myself, who I am, in relationship with others, such that that simple insight can then propagate forward in these unpredictable, nth order, Gardenic kind of ways.
Thank you for that word, Gardenic. It's beautiful. Tom, might you share briefly enough just to orient those who don't know you or your work, perhaps who aren't watching back, what's wise democracy and wisdom? And then if you might pass it over to Nora, if that's cool, Nora, to sort of give the blurb on warm data and Nora, to orient us, and then however we want to go from there, if you like.
Well, I would offer the question of how to do that ongoing in the moment co-learning collectively as communities, as societies by design, and in the context of what is probable what is probable being and doing in the world that will, or what is our being and doing in the world that is probably able to generate long-term broad benefit, which is my touchstone for wisdom. And I say probable because we don't know. I say in the moment because things constantly change, so there's a continual reorientation, it's a navigational turn this way, turn that way. And the turning metaphor feeds both dance and conversation. That conversation is to turn with versus is a turn route. So I see generative conversation, not any conversation, but certain kinds of conversation, some of which we understand, some of which we don't, as a primary tool for doing this collective learning and turning. I just noticed the rhyme. I didn't notice that for that sentence. And that's a large part of my inquiry, or what are the patterns, proto-methodologies, whatever, that can help us move to the next adjacent step in evolving that capacity. I guess that's enough for me. Nora?
Okay, I'm just parking now, so this is perfect timing. Let's see, here we go. I love hearing your reflections already on the readying piece. It's been a oh, there. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're coming through. Thank you. We can see you too. It's great.
Now I'm muted.
Good. Oh, now it changed, but you're not muted, but somehow it changed.
You went distant.
A Bluetooth thing maybe, or these things happen. Oh, we heard you, but now we don't. Sure. Anyone want to?
Keep going, and I'll be right back. Okay.
No worries. Great. Who would like to offer anything at all in response to Tom or the moment, perhaps? Welcome, everyone.
I'm not sure if this is the right context for this, but one of the things that I've been wondering is, how does Kernel relate to the rest of the world? I mean, it's such a great community, and there's there's all these great patterns and curricula, syllabi, best practices, structure, etc. And we've had, Philip and I've had some of this conversation about why do we love Kernel, and so the question is, what is it about Kernel that is so great, and how can it be hopefully not limited to just Kernel? So I don't know if that's a provocation that makes any sense in this context, but anyway, it seems to me.
How can Kernel be promoted to general?
Yeah, nice. We have to grow from the sprout, I guess. Well, we do have a few people here that probably don't know much about Kernel, if at all. And then we have others who are very much involved, including one of the co-founders and stewards. Broadly, though, and I'm not sure if it came out clearly, Andy, in your intro, but Kernel is ostensibly a co-learning around Web3, quote unquote, right? So this is like a term that has some utility, and I'm actually kind of tired of it and think that it's limited. But anyway, without debating that it's broadly about decentralization and blockchain and that sphere of spheres. So yeah, a big part of our lens or of inquiry is working with these kinds of tools and systems.
Yeah, I guess that's my question, is how does that generalize to not just Web3, but any realm of collective learning? Or is it dependent on Web3?
I'll just quickly, it seems like, Andy, go ahead. Yeah.
I think one of the points that I'd like to touch on here is that conversation and the learning and turning that Tom points at so beautifully is an incredible site for the investigation right now of collective intelligence or collective wisdom as a practice. What's really fascinating about it is that if you try and take what is said now and apply it in different contexts, there is some degree of applicability to that. Otherwise, meaning can't shift across context. You don't get iterability and all of the important aspects of Marx that Derrida and some of these folks look at. But also, if we're not incredibly aware always, in the sense that Marianne Brunn talks about in the inertia of language, then we become the tools of past paradigms and ideologies. And this is something that I'm enormously aware of, precisely because, like, if Kernel or anything settles into some specific kind of significance, then its value and utility as a place for the kind of investigation and co-learning and learning and turning that Tom is talking about is decreased, precisely because it's settled into some particular and more narrow, defined, to have boundaries drawn around, right? Some defined place Whereas what I understand Nora to be saying in Readying, and what Tom, I think, is pointing out in so much of his work, which is truly beautiful. I'm really a great fan, Tom. I don't know if that came through the first time. Is exactly that's a funny poesis, submergence, coalescence, the hidden side of things, right? And this is why I mentioned Sufism in the intro. It's not generally what I talk about in Kernel at all. I hardly ever talk about it because it's not really relevant to a lot of the discussions that we have. But here it is, precisely because those kinds of traditions, whether it's Sufism or Zen or Taoism or the I Ching or any of these so-called esoteric traditions, are exactly concerned with the transmission of the hidden without violating it, right? Without naming it, without pinning it down and saying, "Oh, we've got it. We know what Tao is. We know what God is." You know, it's defended against first and foremost in every single one of these books. It says Allahu Akbar. It means greater. It's not great or greatest. It's not a defining feature. It's just greater. Whatever you can think, it's greater. Or the Tao that can be named is not the eternal Tao. Same thing, right? Same, like, as soon as you name or define these things, they become less active, less vital, less fresh as a garden, less informative as a place for ongoing investigation together. Because we come and we know what it is. Oh, kernel's about Web3. Okay, well then we're just going to talk about Web3. And that's cool. It has a place. I'm available for it. I love parts of Web3. I think it's nice. But it's not the only thing that I'm interested in. And I think that when we can accommodate one another in that way, then we have more possibility, not just in the context of kernel, perhaps, but you know, our warm lives. Nora talks about this so beautifully. I'm always going back to the doctor who comes to my home and sees that, you know, I really don't look after myself, and the floor is cold and I'm not cooking good food. No wonder I'm, you know, suffering from whatever ailments I have. So, yeah. But Nora is back, and
Welcome back, Nora.
Thank you. I'm thinking about the metaphor in the Tolkien books of taking the ring back to Mordor. And there's something about this that is relevant here, which is that so many of the insidious troubles that are woven into, steeped into, cooked into the sort of multi-institutional world that we're living in right now are very, very difficult to get at with any kind of direct corrective. And especially, I think, in this sort of unnuanced approach to scaling up to meet problems. I think there's a place for scaling up, but there's a place where you shouldn't scale up. And I'm not completely sure how to discern those two. But I think it's an important discussion of when is it time to scale up and when is it not. And so what happened for me was, in working with the Warm Data Lab and the People Need People process, I started to perceive that something was really changing. But the way that things were changing was so unpredictable in its detail. It is not unpredictable in its atmosphere, in the tone, in the aesthetic of the change. But the way that that change happens is different in different circumstances for different people. So this is interesting. And people need people, it's called. The People Need People is the online version of the Warm Data Lab. And the way that some of you, I think, have done it before, But the way that it works is that there's a story that gets told, a very personal story. Any personal story is going to have a trans-contextual process in it. Any personal story will hold all sorts of things from history to culture to economy to education to family to, right? So whenever we really want to speak in terms of trans-contextual process, any personal story has all of it in there. It gets much more difficult when you try to turn it out and point to all of the contexts and identify them and pull them apart. But when they are your life and your own memory, you can start to feel how they coalesce, how they come together. People need people process. There's a story and then there's a question. The important piece here for this conversation around this is the attention to the level of abstraction in the question and the way that it's in relationship to the contexts. And that this is critical, because if you ask a question that is going to ignite errors in levels of abstraction, you can try to generate all the conversation you want, and it will never be a garden. So this attention to the relationship between the question and the context is really important. I'll carry on. So the question might be something like, what is continuing? And then everybody gets broken into a breakout room, and each breakout room has 3 contexts in it. So it might be culture, history, and education, or ecology, family, and technology, or there's 3 contexts. And the contexts are very carefully chosen. The question is very carefully chosen. They're tested. But what is important is that because there's a triple context, what happens is people are pushed immediately into a different way of looking. What is continuing through the context of family, ecology, and technology? Okay, and you can feel this like disorientation that happens. So all the sort of prefab rehearsed scripts that we have are jumbled at that point. This is very important. And people get disoriented and they start to detour and they find things to say, and then stories start coming out. And then they think, oh dear, we have to stay on these contexts. And then they realize, oh, we already are on them. So the people need people process is named thus because, incidentally, then you break out room 3 more times. And so you get this moire, this overlapping of all these contextual stories in the course of an hour, which is really important. And what happens in this work is that people begin to perceive that they are living in a multi-contextual process, that they are multi-contextual, that other people are, that life is, and that the way that things have been in description and laid out before them makes it easy to not tend to very vital parts of our relational process. This is key. So that noticing of what's not being tended. It's that feeling, if you have children, of, oh, I haven't given my kid a snack in 5 hours, or, I forgot to send them with a raincoat today and it's pouring, but at obviously a much deeper level. And so So I guess the people need people part has to do with the fact that we cannot really have community if we can't commune. So there's a lot of beautiful collaborative community projects out there, but in the face of that, we have communities that are so polarized that families can't even talk to each other. Right, left, and center, I'm seeing relationships get split. And how are we supposed to do mutual learning and collaboration when we have so much divisiveness that we're living in? I don't know if you've ever tried to live in a community before, but most of the time it's a disaster. I've lived in several, and almost all of them have been a total failure. And they're failures because of the lack of perception of mutual interdependency and tending to that. We don't have language for it. We don't have habits of communing that hold that. So in what I perceive in this era is that actually our institutions can't really do much for us anymore. And increasingly, that will be even more true. My kids are not getting an education at school for a world that they're going to need to live in. When I go to the doctor, most of the time they give me drugs that are actually not what I need, if I can even get in there. Every time I try to interface with the institutional status quo, it's not there for me in any kind of way that is actually vital. So people are going to need people. We need each other. What can we do to nourish the possibility of being ready to need each other? I would say in a nutshell, that's my whole work right now. So that readying for mutual needing, mutual learning needs a lot of tending right now. After several centuries of industrialism and individualism and competitive behavior and being taught by our parents that we need to individuate, and then our parents feeling like they can't be burdens, and right, nobody's allowed. A successful parent is one who breeds a child who does not need them. Check that out. Right? What would it mean to have the idea as a parent to begin with that your children are never leaving home? How would you raise your kids differently if you knew they were never leaving home? How would you treat your parents differently if you knew that you were going to be the one changing their socks and tending their calluses and feeding them? How would they treat you differently if they knew that you were going to be the one there? So this is this intergenerational, people need people process. And for some people, it's going to be family relations, and other people, it's not. But at any rate, the question here is, and then I'll stop, is how are we holding each other hostage in the existing systems? And how do we become mutually ready to release each other from these epistemological traps? I'll stop there.
I'm wondering, Tom, if we might pass it directly to you for a couple of reasons in the interest of time, but I know that you also went through the work, Nora's recent work, and then maybe we can open it up to the room, if that's okay. Tom, you're muted though.
I did not go through Nora's recent work. I went through one of her earliest prototypes in San Francisco.
Oh, very good. Okay, then. I stand corrected. Excuse me.
I turn it over to whoever might have.
Anyone else, or just to respond to what was just said, as you like.
I just say I'm very appreciative of the perspective. One of my inquiries is in the face of mega crises and collapse scenarios. I find myself challenged to apply my kind of work that I've been doing over the last 30 years to that kind of reality, emerging reality. And I appreciate Nora's conscious feelers into that emerging reality. Check.
Wonderful. Go ahead.
I'll ask one question to keep Nora talking a little bit longer, because there was a lot of love for much of what you were saying, Nora. And in this piece on readying, one of the things which really, among many, that sat very deeply with me, some of which you pointed at, with the transcontextuality and the notion of submergence and aphanipoiesis. But you write in that piece to deprogram, to resensitize to the whole and the not yet known.
Mm-hmm.
The whole and the not yet known. To listen for pattern and ethos, gesture, inkling and vibe, the way a dancer's body is present and available to the outer sounds and inner shiftings that beckon. I'd love to hear you riff more on that. And I bring it up because I know of Tom's proclivity for wholeness and its relationship to wisdom, but it's so interesting that it's balanced in your work with the not yet known and the inner and the outer shiftings. And that kind of movement between worlds is so fascinating for me, and I would love to hear a little bit more if you would be willing.
I was working with a piece of my father's work, and in it, he asks this question that I refer to in the paper. How does an organism know how to evolve? And this is really a very profound question, because the way that an organism is used to being in its familiar patterns of behavior, whether that organism is you and me or an organism in the soil, or a deer or whatever it is, right? The way that an organism is accustomed to being is not going to hold that information that is going to be a new limb or a new fin or a new digestive process or a new idea. So this is very interesting. Where is this sitting? Because if life were really a machine, then all the pieces would keep being the same pieces and they would keep doing what they're doing. But that's not how it is. Actually, they're changing. Evolution is happening. So this is kind of a mind-blowing reality that in order to continue, things actually have to change, and they have to change in ways that must be outside the familiar. If it's inside the familiar, it gets metabolized into the familiar process. Right? And I think we've seen this, in fact, all too frequently. In hopes, I mean, how many change-making processes, programs have we all witnessed that were frankly too familiar? And because they were too familiar, the change that they made change at the level of, let's just get a higher score at the same computer game. But we're not getting out of the game. So we're learning, but we're learning to get better at the same game. And evolution is not working like that. What's happening with evolution is that in order for a meadow to keep meadowing, actually the whole thing has to be an exponential possibility of relationships that stay together, but change. Okay, so there must be continuance and discontinuance. And this is that what you're pointing to, Andy. This is wholeness and not knowing. And the absolute essential quality of not knowing in wholeness. Without it, you get obsolescence. Does that make sense? Are you with me? Yeah.
Just writing it down. Beautiful.
Can I ask a question, Nora? Lovely to see you again. Quite a few of us on the call are interested in wielding the digital in interesting ways, or at least impairing it, being wielded in deleterious ways. How does the digital feature in what you've just said? Are you optimistic about its future application? Are you agnostic to its application? Are you in despair? I'm fascinated to hear you talk to that.
Well, I mean, you were in, for anyone in this room who doesn't know, Philip was actually in, I think, the second warm data training course. It was a historic moment. And the course has changed quite a bit since then, but that was for the Warm Data Lab, which is an in-person, really highly analog human space that is contingent upon gesture and, you know, the flush of cheeks and blinking eyes and the smell of breath and, you know. But then when coronavirus hit, we had to put it online. And you may remember that I was adamant that that wasn't possible. And so I had to eat my words, and they were rather dry and crispy. And that was when I really struggled, like, how do I do this? Because the thing that was important about what was happening in the lab was that people were mixing and combining contextual impressions in ways that were nonverbal, right? What's interesting about warm data processes is never what people say. It doesn't matter at all what people say. That's not what's interesting. What's interesting is how what you said actually unlocks or triggers or opens an impression or a memory for someone else. And how that then gets combined with another memory or another thought. And so where I'm going with this, Philip, is that I was challenged into how to keep the warm data process from being a linear click game. Click on the context of ecology, click on the context of family, click on the context, right? And that's not going to do it. So I had to do this triple contexting thing. I'm waiting for somebody in the world to like actually get how interesting this is. Because in the triple contexting thing, what happens is the human being in the room, in this room, the human being has to have that coalescence of the three contexts in me. It's not mitigated. So it's a very specific kind of use of the digital realm to allow for a still analog coalescence. And that I think is really interesting, but I'm waiting for someone to pick up on it. And I can't seem to communicate how important it is that the learning doesn't come from the digital. Okay, the conditions for the learning do. So what we did is we made second order process here. And it's the second order that's really important. And what most people try to do is to create first order learning in the digital space. And that goes nowhere. And so this is, I don't know how to communicate this. Maybe you can help me, because I have a lot of friends who are working in digital room, and what we're getting is second order disasters out of digital space instead of second order learning, second order communing, second order coalescing. And part of that is that the hit, the recognition of the hit, what I'm getting is customarily explicit. And so having it be longer in its cooking, right? So one of the things that happens with warm data is it doesn't really matter what anybody says in the lab, but after the lab, you go and you have a conversation with someone and you actually approach that conversation differently. That's important. The lab doesn't matter to me. What matters is what has shifted in the premises so that in the following encounters, there's a change. Yeah. So I guess please help me with this. I'm trying to get this somewhere to take seed. And it seems like it doesn't want to. So yes, let's talk about it, Philip. Dunya.
I put my hand up so I would be first to speak. But I noticed that Karen put her hand up right at the moment. So perhaps there's something that's very alive, and I'd be happy to go, okay, well, then I'll go. Thank you, Nora. Actually, I would love to have a conversation with you about the three contexts and how to bring it in pro-social world. I could see how it could be interesting. And Philip, when you spoke about the digital, I find it very interesting because we just started the learning journey today, and I can see how there's a way in which this digital realm is forcing us to be very creative around how we can connect with each other. And even today, there was a way in which, how do we all monitor each other? And I remember, Ray, you sent me this during the summer, this thing around these gestures that we can use to say when someone is going too long, or when there's these code of conduct that we can develop with each other, which reminds me of a fireside that we had a few weeks ago, where there was this notion of wearing roles and that there could be a costume to it. And just inviting this play to kind of to help navigate this unknown, because even raising my hand without knowing what I was going to say, it took courage. And I would love it if there are ways in which there is more fun and play that makes it that doesn't feel risky to take that step and to look at it as more of there's no way you can do it wrong. And so that's one aspect. And then just thank you so much for the work that you do around transcontextual. I love that word so much, and how this is so alive in how I see the world, and how actually connecting online allows us to all connect from such different contexts, and even exploring how can we share those contexts with each other. So just the whole digital culture face-to-face is really a fascinating realm for this work. And I see the value of your three context game, and I ask, what are all the other games that we want to play? So
Yeah. Wonderful. Yeah. 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 How do we, I mean, one thing that I always do that I get in trouble for is that I don't do introductions. And there's a way in which this introductory space has been a way of coding a kind of safety of being heard and being seen. But there's a terrific and terrible irony there, which is that if we introduce ourselves in the beginning of our conversation, we don't get to find out who we are when we're together. And so it's much more interesting to introduce yourself at the end of the conversation, because then you have a sense of who you are together. What aspects of you might be interesting to bring into the group. And I think that, or just don't and see where it goes. But this is something that I find, even in terms of just, that question of roles, that if I say, hi, my name's Nora, and I work with complex systems, then I find that I'm caught in my own description. And it's a huge reductionist description of myself. I have reduced myself beyond not only what I know of myself, but of what I don't know, who I could be when I'm with you. So I think it's a really interesting space where there's all kinds of already codified social programs that I think we need to pay extra attention to as we move into these coming years, of how it is that we can come into a space, and that message of we are going to, pay attention and respect each other's complexity and transcontextual, your multitudes are here. I am here to meet your multitudes with my multitudes. Okay. And then we can be and see where it goes in a different way, maybe. But do you feel how dangerous it is? There's the sense of we're taking off the container, we're taking off the codes that show that it's safe. But you know what? The world is not safe right now. We are not safe. And we're especially not safe if we don't have access to those possibilities we have not yet found. And they exist between us. So I'm really interested in that. Yeah.
Lauren, please.
I turned on my camera about half an hour into the conversation because I started feeling really ugly that I wasn't showing up my face in such a conversation that I was enjoying so much, because it is an immense pleasure for me to be gathering with people, even if it's digitally. And I put my hand up, and I thought it was really lovely that also Donia said, I put my hand up and I didn't know what I was going to say. And I said, exactly, I put my hand up and I didn't know what I was going to say. But it was kind of reply to what Nora was saying, that I need help. I don't know how to do this. And it's about a year and a half ago, I stopped participating in group meetings online because it dawned on me that I was getting a lot of theory and I wasn't being able to put the theory in practice.
Mm-hmm.
So I decided to start acting more locally. And right now, exactly this week, and I'm going to blame it on the eclipse, I'm having a huge crisis of conflict with the local situation that I've been applying myself to for a year and a half, because I also can't make myself understood. And what I would like to make myself understood is in the idea that theory is one thing and practice is another. And I think we only actually learn through practice. And even through practice, very often we do not learn.
Mhm.
So this is the contribution that I wanted to make right now. Thank you.
Mhm. Yeah, that learning. I mean, it's because it's so transcontextual, and so often practice is in one context too. Right? The habits that we've produced through multiple contexts, multiple relationships, the way we see ourselves and see our world, right? It's in school, it's in the economy, it's in our family, it's in the culture, it's in the media, it's in tech, it's at the doctor, it's in our health. It's like, it's all over the place. It gets confirmed. And so the practice has to be just as ecologically diverse. You know, it's a requisite variety of practice. Yeah. Mario, I'm going to have to get off in just a minute, but go ahead.
I think a few of us are. Maybe just quickly. I don't know, Andy, if some of us can hang about in the room, or is that going to work? If not, it's okay.
You're more than welcome. Please.
Okay, because I think we're going to jump. Some of us have to jump, but yeah, go ahead, Mario and Ray, and then we'll see if we have a chance to wrap up in some ways. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I just want to say how grateful I am for this idea of releasing each other. And I was questioning myself of like why some relationships weren't working and some were, and now I see that this pattern of like the ones that are working well are the ones that were at the same level of release from institutions, and the ones that aren't are there's a lot of disparity. And and so now that I can see this, can perceive this, it's really helpful. I think it's going to help even sorting out some of the ones that aren't working.
Thank you. I hope so. Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
So I would love to be part of this conversation about the three contexts that you're trying to get people to understand, Nora, because it really makes sense to me. And what I was thinking about is how learning occurs in interactions, and it takes place in all sorts of ways that like a bee and a plant co-evolve because of the interaction that occurs with a pollinator and pollen. And Humberto Maturana said a long time ago that when he was thinking about how to define life, that's the limit of life, is that the evolution can occur in the changing of genes. But with language, we can evolve and generate concepts very, very quickly. And so the idea of taking three contexts that are different semantic meanings and putting them together in the room and saying these are the three contexts is a wonderful genetic tumbler to create new insights, because it's priming people to think about what might be the relationship between the different contexts. And so it seems like it could be super generative, and I love it. And I want to learn how to do this and be part of conversations about it, because for me, it just makes enormous sense.
And so it's only the online ones that have three contexts at a time, but through the process, people go through 9 contexts, because 3 is not enough. If you get 3, you're going to get fascism. It's going to take more than 3. It probably takes more than 9, but by the time you get to 9, they start to reproduce on their own. And we need to have a deeper talk about this, but I love it. And I just love this group, and I'm so grateful to have met you. I feel like I do not want to get off the phone right now with you, but I have to because there's a couple of people waiting for me to give a talk out there. So I gotta.
Okay. So I know that that 1st of November evening time is not great for you, but if you have a chance to pass through, then we'd love to see you. And we're sort of still building up to this, looking at the patterns of community gardening from the land-based and the digital and everything in between.
Yes.
And so just to remind everyone.
And we have our little email thing rolling. So let's just roll ourselves into another meeting like this.
Beautiful.
Okay. All right. Bye, you guys. Much
so
fun.
much.
Bye.
All right. And for those who need to jump, then thank you for being here. And some of us can hang about a bit. Let's see how much we're able that we like. But
thank you, Charles. I have to go on at 6 o'clock, so I've got to dash.
Indeed.
But see you very soon. Thanks for arranging this. Awesome.
Sure, I'm delighted it worked out. So far, so good.
Usually I can stay today. I cannot, but this was wonderful. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Okay.
So
Thank
happy. Tom, while you're still here, I'm wondering, I don't know, I guess we'll have the recording to share around, including back with Nora, and I don't know, I didn't mean to put you on the spot before, because I think I misinterpreted something in your email that I thought you had also, through the weekend, read this readying piece, but I know that you and Nora go back some years and had quite a lot of interaction, some of which I'd seen and some of which you blogged about, and so I'm wondering if you have any further anything to offer on that.
Not really. I'm not familiar enough with her current work. She's evolved a lot, really clearly, since that first Worm Data Lab. Yeah, I had fun with her after the Worm Data Lab. We and a couple of my friends went for coffee, and I had fun poking at her certainties in the midst of her the solidity of what she knew. Yeah, and I was inviting her. The one thing I remember particularly was she was saying that the context that you use, there's a whole pile of formal philosophy behind the choice of the context that you name for people to go through in the Worm Data Lab, and that you need to be trained in that that philosophy in order to be able to do that work. And I felt that as a large barrier. I'm grassroots organizer type, and the idea that it would take somebody getting trained in philosophy in order to organize a Worm Data Lab was like really upsetting to me. So one of the things I poked at was she talks about how you need to do things like art and poetry. You know, the regular linear language doesn't work to deal with this. So I said, well, you should write a little summary of each of those philosophers with a poem. So we would have all have more access to the essence of what you want out of those philosophers. She laughed. That was one of my last memories of engaging. I haven't engaged with her for years. That was, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago. Anyway, she has a different approach to wholeness and than I do, and I'm still trying to digest. I have tremendous respect for her in the current time fractal, in our piece of the time track, our piece of the larger world. I have tremendous respect for what she is seeing going on in that space. And I have been, and the whole idea of scaling and the doubts about scaling and most of the kinds of scaling that go on are everybody doing this particular thing at a local level, and or having it institutionalized in some top-down way. And one of my inspirations for a radically different kind of scaling, and anybody familiar with my work knows I talk about this a bunch, is this thing that McQueen's magazine did in 1991, where they had their polling firm pick 12 people who on a whole pile of demographic divisions represented the diversity of Canada. And then they hired Roger Fisher of Getting to Yes fame, major Harvard worldwide negotiator, to come up for 2.5 days and figure out and help these people at a time when Canada was almost falling apart, help these people come to a vision of Canada. And they did. And it's very interesting, the story of how they did. And I have a bunch of that stuff in my books, my website. But what was most remarkable was the coverage. And they worked with Canadian TV. Canadian TV did an hour-long public affairs documentary about it. But their coverage got people who were reading McQueen's and there were like 40 pages of coverage, like what Time magazine, it's like whoever does 40 pages of coverage of anything, got the readers to identify with the participants, either for or against. Like, I like this person represents who I am, what I believe, and this other person is a total asshole, and I don't know why they even picked him, he's a bad person. And so they pulled you into the personae of the drama, and then they did the drama, hour by hour. What happened? Who said what? How did people respond? Pictures of people by body language and all that. And the thing almost collapsing on Saturday night, and then breakthrough when one Canadian woman really listened to a Quebec woman. And, it's just like the vicarious experience by millions of Canadians reading and watching this coverage is a different kind of scaling. And we know so much about what to do in the room, including virtual rooms. I mean, dynamic facilitation, open space, these are things that are really interesting to me, and watching them over pandemic go online when it seemed impossible for them to go online was a really interesting experience. So hearing Nora's experience with her stuff was interesting. But that having archetypal conversations of various kinds, there's lots of different methodologies, and the warm data work is a whole nother one, but being able to see it, identify it, enter into it, to have millions of people do that on things that are really divisive or very confusing or whatever, to watch transformation and mutual learning happening is a different kind. It feels like it's less fraught. It's less fraught as of now, but I focus on citizen deliberations and how to make them able to generate collective wisdom instead of just popular solutions. I mean, getting to popular solutions is a great accomplishment, but sometimes wisdom doesn't necessarily equate with popular solutions. So that's my inquiry, how to push that model further and further. Randomly selected people talking together for, 2 days or 30 days or whatever it is. What's needed to set the context that they generate more wisdom? That's my central inquiry. But I go, what happens if we get authoritarian governments? And if you're on one of these councils and you say the wrong thing, you're gonna get shot. Suddenly my nice little model that works so well now doesn't work anymore. So I'm interested in the inquiry into how, in the face of authoritarianism, in the face of environmental catastrophe, in the face of lack of connectivity. I mean, there's so many things that could manifest in the next few decades that would make models that are miraculous now totally irrelevant. So I'm interested in, and I know Nora is well grounded in the mega. I mean, Charlie sent out a link to a conversation between her and Daniel Schmackenberger interesting conversation between those two. I only got about 20 minutes into it before I needed to get a little more sleep before this thing, but I'm going to watch the whole thing. And they come to terms right at the beginning with what we're facing, which is just gigantic. And I thought a book about it should be, if Schmachtenberg wrote a book, it should be called Terminal Velocity. And so, yeah, so there's a funny way in which, as right in my own development right now, the Co-Intelligence Institute, which has largely been a container for my work without much else going on in it except for my work, is now breaking into a new, the board is making the Co-Intelligence Institute into a much better, stronger, more accessible and engaging entity with a new website, all the rest. And my whole life is shifting, both in terms of the context I work with, in terms of my institute, and in terms of watching the dynamics of the world, trying to go, what does that have to do with what I'm doing? And for better and worse, I tend to start at a theoretical level, not actually, I start at an intuitive, inspired level. Stuff comes to me and then I have to figure out how to articulate it so people will understand what it was that I just saw. But one of the things I've been poking at with a couple of colleagues is how to get down to the raw basics of co-intelligence. Wise democracy has been relatively well developed in the wise democracy pattern language and the rest, but behind it is the co-intelligence idea of intelligence that takes wholeness, interconnectedness, and co-creativity seriously. And so I've done lots of work on wholeness. And it's funny that it's like 6 months ago in one of our chunking co-intelligence things, I came up with the idea of powerful not knowing. Powerful not knowing is fundamental to encountering wholeness. And so here it is. Nora has developed that in some very practical kinds of ways of being. And I go, yes, yes, yes. The powerful not knowing in the sense of you're not stuck in certainty. Certainty is an emotion of nailing down a clarity. You can have clarity without certainty. You can have clarity which is waiting for, oh, is there something? This is the way that things fit together as far as I can see now, and I'm going to hold that until something bumps up against it that says, oh, there's more to it. More to it than that is my secret formula of the universe. There's always more to it than that. So having ways, cognitive styles, and behavioral styles and emotional styles that can embody the more to it than that, and the humility, curiosity. All these are powerful forms of not knowing. And I think Nora probably has some further nuances I need to understand further. So I'm in a funny place of reading and listening to lots of other well thought out or well tried out things while I'm helping my colleagues work on, advances in the mini public citizen deliberative council kind of world, because that's an up and coming thing. That's a wave to ride right now, and we're trying to do interesting experiments in that world. But the sense of its potential obsolescence, it's a potential rapid obsolescence because of mixture of technology and politics. So there's a funny way in which I have my bubble of great people, great work, great visions, great ideas that I operate in separately from what's going on. I know what's going on out there. I sense where it's heading. I work a lot on not knowing where it's heading. my whole being goes, I know where this is heading. It's not towards us being around very long, much longer. But ultimately, none of us really know. and trying to ground myself in that. And the work that I'm doing will probably have some impact on what happens. So what the heck? See how far I can push it, and see how much I can learn from other people who are in that mode of seeing how far they can go with understanding what's going on and what makes sense to do. Anyway, that's a riff.
A beautiful riff. Thank you. I don't know exactly what to say, but I did want to provoke you slightly more, and maybe try to ground what your riff with something that was in there maybe much earlier in terms of the participatory governance stuff, and the phrase or the acronym that's coming up is something that you and I have exchanged around, or I know you've delved deeply into, which is the MS3, sort of the we're kind of relating to the multi-contextual or trans-contextual, then the multi. Maybe you can and sort of how can that be tangible within this citizen participatory scenarios?
It's interesting, the MS3 that he's talking about. I hadn't thought of it as multi-contextual, but it absolutely is. And there's interesting potential applications en route to collapse. And that's multi-sector, multi-stakeholder, multi-scale collaborations, conversations. And this, it was like 5 years ago or so, one of my colleagues wrote a blog post of a new realization about her work. And she'd been working for years with food systems in Appalachia, trying to get the whole system in the room. It's like the people who are growing the food, the people who are eating the food, the people who are transporting the food, the people who are regulating all this, the people who are selling the food, farmers markets, retailers, blah, blah, blah. Get the whole system in the room and have them talk until it's clear what kinds of collaboration makes sense. And all these people are networked within their fields, their subsets of the larger field of food systems. And so when they come up with insights that make sense for all of them and start working on them, that spreads through the networks, and that's what starts happening. And these people who have been co-creating what was before are now co-creating what's happening next. The co-creation, intelligence takes co-creativity seriously. That's a big branch of the co-intelligence vision. So if you can get the people who are co-creating the conditions that are going on now to successfully communicate together and find common ground, common vision, whatever, common orientation, that changes what they're co-creating. And what her realization is this is a new form of governance. Government is included but transcended. There's more players, multi-sectors, multi-stakeholders, and multi-scale in her case, because it was across state lines. Appalachia is across state lines. And several weeks or months, I can't remember anymore, later, another colleague said, "Oh, you need to talk to this fellow, Steve Waddell, who's working with Sustainable Development Goals at the UN." And he's saying, multi-state, he's saying that within each Sustainable Development Goal, there are emerging multi-sector, multi-stakeholder, multi-scale collaborations to work on the Sustainable Development Goal. And nobody's organizing this. It's just happening because in order to do successful work in each of the domains named by the Sustainable Development Goals, you need to have collaborations with other players. And some of them are relatively peer, some of them are dominated by some government or by a multinational corporation. It's all different varieties and qualities, but that phenomenon is happening. And Steve was saying, I think this is an emerging form of governance that is as big as the shift from monarchy to, Republican democracies. And it's like, oh, and this is already happening here. I'm trying to get, hey, people do citizen deliberative councils. It's like people sort of uphill battle. Nobody gets what's right, why to do that and all that. And here's something that's already happening. And it has the diversity. I mean, the whole system, one way to carve up the whole in a democracy is we the people. Carve up the people according to their demographics, their perspectives, bring them into the room, get something to happen. That's a citizen assembly, citizen deliberative council model, mini publics. And then there's a different way to cut it, which is those people who are affected by a decision should be part of making it. That's another definition of democracy. And that's stakeholders. If you don't say stakeholders are the top elite, stakeholders, anybody who has a stake in what happens. And so in the wise democracy pattern language, there's inclusive stakeholder governance is one of the patterns, and another one is citizen stakeholder integration. So how do you put these two different approaches to governance together? And they already exist in many forms. Citizen assemblies will have stakeholders providing information to the citizen deliberators. And in some cases, after they make their decisions, like in Vorarlberg, Austria, once the citizen council has come up with its recommendations, they're passed over to a stakeholder group called a responder group to actually implement them. So there's a variety of different ways that these things are already integrated. And I go, how far could we push that? To what extent? Because what the citizens come up with won't necessarily satisfy the stakeholders. What the stakeholders come up with won't necessarily satisfy the citizens. What's their proper relationship? How do we integrate the best of both worlds? So that's a theory level. That's one of the main things I think about and would like to see much more experimentation on. And yes, multi-contextual. It's a very interesting way to put it. And that's, I think of diversity of entity. You want diverse entities, you want diverse stakeholders, you want diverse citizens. I hadn't thought of those entities as embodying and carrying with them contexts. I have wondered what would happen if one did a warm data lab as part of the briefings that happen in these citizen assembly kinds of things. People are given lectures or engagements with experts on this topic and with various stakeholders. What would happen if, in addition to that kind of heady, here's the facts of the matter thing, if you did warm data labs to sort of shake up their certainties, the traditional touchstones that they've been given to work with? I don't know, but you've complexified my thinking by making the stakeholders into carriers. I now can see both stakeholders and citizens. If you're choosing them for their diversity, the chances are you're going to get different contexts and how to use that fact in redesigning some of these exercises. I don't know, but it's very juicy inquiry. Thanks.
Super juicy.
Here I am learning in the learning lab.
Michael is here, unmuted. Welcome, if you like.
Delighted to be here. Thanks for the prompt, Charles and Tom. Lovely stuff. As it says on the bottle, the label is usually pretty accurate, and today was one such. As a sort of a reflection, if the word face-to-face, the presence, the smell of the crowd, the roar of the grease paint, that sort of thing. I found something very interesting when I first met somebody in real life that I spent a lot of time on screen with. When I met them in real life, I did not see them. I did not recognize them. I had a two-dimensional, depthless experience of this person. But this was not common many other people I've met for the first time, many times on screen, and then met in presence and found a direct affinity immediately. So I started looking at what is it that sometimes gets lost in these connections, but you don't realize you lost it until you meet the person in reality and find it's not there for you. And what it came down to was that little disquiet that underlies a connection with somebody when you're not quite sure about it. It never got resolved with this person. And for many months, I'd been having conversations with them, important conversations, but we'd never found a way out of that stone in our shoe or the grind in the gearbox or something. And so we'd operated over the top of it. And when we finally met, I realized I'd never first met him. We hadn't met because we'd ignored the grind from the gearbox or the noise or the buzz on the screen or something. So I've lately become much more interested in my experience of the wholeness of a conversation with somebody else online. Is it there or is it not? And I found that to be a very well, a very attractive information channel. I've learned a lot from discovering my sense of, are we there yet with somebody else? And that's a comment on what I've heard and seen with this little group today. The high connectivity affinity. There's talk about angels on a pinhead, but there's so many angels on this pinhead.
I just have to thank you for surfacing one of my favorite, it's not even a metaphor. Well, are we there yet? It's the kids in the back seat on the road trip. And I'm using this all the time. Like, are we there yet?
Are we here yet?
Presumably.
Well, and no, it's kind of cool that I mean, I've been listening in the background and cooking also, but this idea of I've been researching this idea of wholeness now for some time, and it's part of my academic work, and I'm integrating in my projects. But I keep coming back to that. It is here. Like at every moment, the possibility for wholeness to happen is there. I had this tendency for the longest time to look at it as some phenomenon out there that's going on, and it's so not that. And I couldn't wrap my head around it because I'm looking for something, some model, some ideal to compare it to. And so anyway, I'm having a lot of fun with it now because I find it something I can access some degree of wholeness at any moment when I'm conscious about it. So anyway, just wanted to share that. And yes, we are here, and then we're not, and then we're here, and then we're not.
I come to call it semi-synchronous conversation, because it's like stretchy, and it's also just an amalgam of both synchronous, asynchronous. But in reality, it's semi-synchronous. It's like sometimes you can see the other person typing on the chat, and you know there's like signs of life there, or you see their light on, and you're expecting ... or not, you know, and then it goes in all the different forms. Andy, you've been patiently, maybe pregnantly quiet. I'm wondering, I'm wondering if we might, I don't know if it's too kind of crass to sort of throw it back on the Web3 thing somehow, but I feel like here we are, and maybe some of us are going to go, more of us are going to go sooner. And what do you think? What are you feeling?
I will politely decline the request for a Web3, but I will tell a story, which is
much better.
I have a dear friend, a man whose name is Anthony Atlee. He is a writer and a Zen master who lives in the Karoo the empty heartland of South Africa. It's the semi-arid desert, flat, old seabed, one of the oldest landscapes in the world, and perfect for practicing Zen because it's completely empty. And you can go and stay with him. They turned the cowshed into a zendo, and you can sit in the morning and the evening and listen to the corrugated iron creak as it either warms up or cool down. And the windmill, or the windpomp, as we call it here, creaking away and bringing up water from the spring that exists where he stays. And he tells this story of his teacher, who used to talk about the difference in Zen between the world of Ji and the world of Ri. Ji is this world, duality, space and time. This shore is how it's generally translated. And Ri, the other shore, the farther shore, the way across. And his master used to say, we move between the two 84,000 times per second. And then, of course, this is just in reflection of Mario's beautiful comment, right? Of course, all of us try to count that in meditation, try to count the number of times we're joking between being here and then not being here, and being here and then not being here. Very funny. And no one ever...
Not in the meditation session. I'm really conscious that I've kept you, and I didn't go. There's a meditation session that we've been joining, and so we're actually there also, maybe.
Exactly. Wonderful meditation led by a delightful Venezuelan dancer. It's truly just an incredible man. And the thing about this is one doesn't try and count the number of times one comes back to synchronicity or not, or one is here or one isn't. One just notices. And that's actually like Marlin's great practice. As it applies to sati, which is this old Sanskrit word, often translated as mindfulness. It really means remembrance, something like that, something embodied. And that remembrance for me is what's so important as it applies to the transmission of knowledge, to multiple contexts, to wholeness and not knowing. Like, there's something really just fertile about the notion of remembrance, because like we remember, like if I remember, then other people can feel and remember too. It creates, like the way that Marlon talks about it, this field of beneficence, benefaction, he sometimes says in this beautiful Venezuelan accent. And I think that that's what Anthony is sometimes talking about in telling this really funny story of 84,000 times per second. Ji and Ri, flipping, turning, the learning and turning that Tom opened with. It's that. And it's not, the final thing, and not even final, it's not the right word, but the joy of it, the laughter of it, the humor of it, and the tragedy of it, is that it's the same. No difference, not an iota of difference between Ji and Ri, between Nirvana and this world, whatever name you have for it. And then when we remember, then, of course. And
Maybe the difference is in the relationship. Like we're thinking there's us and there's it out there, whether it's one or the other, and it's like, who are we with that, and who was that with us? Kind of different way of, different dimension of thou art that. I was thinking also from Michael's inquiry. I can experience being in a Zoom call in a very, my own self, my way of being in the Zoom call can be very different from one Zoom call to another, from one moment in a Zoom call to another. And different Zoom calls are often very different in their collective consciousness sort of dimension and my sense of who people are and all the rest. and that's true in real time, real world, face-to-face encounters too. And I wonder how much of the dissonance there is the assumptions, habits of thought, habits of sensibility that we have, that we carry from one mode to another mode, not realizing that these are just different modes. Each has gifts and limitations and fits somewhere in a larger picture, and we're encountering somebody new. What would it be like to be conscious in the moment of the shock of, oh, this person is that? In that moment of shock, to be aware what we're experiencing is not the person. We're experiencing our, it's like culture shock. We're experiencing our different way of being, where there's a new context. The thing that's shifted is the context. And our way of being in or holding the context is what's zapping us. And I'm curious about the other way. Is there a sense of loss when you actually know somebody in person, face to face, real world, real time, and then meet them on Zoom? What's different? There's a great personality test called the Berkeley Personality Profile, and it's based on Jung's. I can't remember what there's a set of dichotomies that are Jung bases his personality typing system on, and it uses that. But it says you take it first as you're feeling now. Now imagine you're with your lover. Take it. Take the whole test again. Now imagine you're at work. Take the test again. It's like, and there's interesting both differences and similar threads throughout, which is much, your who you are is so much more complex than a personality test. And then have other people take the test about you. It's like, whoa, what sort of insights are there? And I just feel the it's actually part of my wholeness. It was a gift to me from a guy named another Charles. Name is slipping my mind. Talks about cultural maturity. It's in Seattle. But he once in a conference sitting next to me, and he says, Tom, we don't have to decide whether something's good or bad or right or wrong. We can just try to discern what are its gifts, what are its limitations, and where does it fit in the larger picture. I find that really useful guidance. And whenever people are battling over dichotomies or options or whatever, it's like, oh, why don't we try and understand what are the gifts and limitations of this approach and that approach, and where do they fit? And how do we relate to that? That's part of the bigger picture, is how we relate to that.